Book 5 Chapter 59. So, what are you over here planning? Kimberly asked after I had been sitting at the bar by myself for half an hour, piecing together a theory. Who says I'm planning anything? I responded. I'm just hanging out at the speakeasy, like the rest of you, tying one on. Your status on the red wallpaper says planning, she said. Oh, right, I said. Who even remembered that that was one of the statuses? Maybe since I was always the one planning, I never saw it on other players. I remember it because it's always good to see the high-savvy people planning things. Makes me feel safer. I assume you're thinking about the prophecy we got from Madame Celia or the baby doll. Did you figure it out? Ah, yes, the fortune. Your friends have all fallen, some here, some there. Till they have risen, you've no friends to spare. You know that is what's on my mind, I said. But here's the thing, I don't think it's a prophecy. I don't think it's a fortune, and I don't think it's a warning. It sounds like a warning, she said. It does, doesn't it? If it's not all that, what is it? She asked. I think it's a riddle, like an old-fashioned riddle where you're talking about one thing but look like you're talking about another, I said. My grandpa used to like them. Unfortunately, they are not really in vogue, not for a long time. I think it's because they are too up for interpretation. You know, like, what creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? She looked at me blankly. I don't know, Kimberly said. What is it? A human who crawls and then walks and then uses a cane as they age. That's the riddle of the Sphinx. But I don't think this riddle is as universal as all that. I think this riddle is about our specific experiences, and it's also a lot more mundane. She smiled, ready for me to spill the beans. All right, what do you think it is? I repeated the fortune, word for word. Your friends have all fallen, some here, some there. Till they have risen, you've no friends to spare. I twisted in my seat to look at her straight on. If I'm wrong, don't make fun of me, all right? I think the riddle is referring to rolling a strike in bowling. That was my first thought. The friends are bowling pins, they've all fallen because you rolled a strike, and then, till the machine sets them back up, you can't roll a spare because you have no friends, no bowling pins. Bowling? She asked. I don't know. Does that mean the omens at the bowling alley? Maybe, I said. But then I looked at it again, this time without the metaphor, and I realized that it's about the bowlers themselves, you know, our bowlers, Grace and Reggie, and the others. They all fell in different places, 1 or 2 at a time, and now we have none of them left to spare. The bowling plus the friends, that's what I'm thinking about. I think we're supposed to seek out something about the bowlers. Grace, her brother Reggie, her ex Jessie, their friends Bella and Burke. Kimberly looked excited. I figured there was something so simple about my interpretation that she really wanted it to be true. Otherwise, reading that riddle at face value was pretty depressing. She turned to the others and said, "You all, come over here." Her urgency was very convincing to them because soon enough, I was surrounded by everyone, drinks in hand, wanting to know what Kimberly had called them over for. I think Riley figured it out, she said. The fortune from Madame Celia. She turned to me and said, "You're confident you're right, right?" I don't know. I'd like to think I am. Go on, tell us, Andrew said, barely able to contain himself. So I explained to them what I had explained to Kimberly, and while I had thought it was a silly little idea, they seemed to think it was a lot more serious than that. That is a simple and far more practical interpretation than I was thinking, Andrew said. They seemed genuinely excited. Even though I thought it was just a whack at getting the correct interpretation, they seemed to trust that I must be right for some reason. And as much as I wanted to dampen their expectations, they were talking excitedly, and Kimberly was going over her memory of how to disarm omens at the bowling alley. They were joyful because I had given them a really straightforward heading. It was such a simple interpretation and it was so Carousel. And one turned to me in the middle of their revelry and asked, "So, next up, the bowling alley?" "Nope," I said. And all at once, They stopped talking and just stared at me. And why not? I think it was Cassie who asked. The crybaby, I said. How does that work in? Michael asked. Yeah, what about it? Ant-Man asked. The baby doll is only useful against dangers that we are not aware of. The bowling alley has lots of omens, but we have 3 people here who are perfectly capable of scouting them out. Why would we be sent to pick up the baby doll if we just had to go to the bowling alley? That wasn't to say the bowling alley was safe. It wasn't, but the danger came from omens. So what then? Kimberly asked. There's a place in Carousel that's dangerous, but no one knows why. Don't you remember? I asked. People will get posted there, but there are no omens. After a moment, Ant-Man said, Carousel Family Video. The first time we'd ever held a version of the Atlas, a very redacted version, we had learned that Carousel Family Video, a once important hotspot for players that allowed them to rent movies they had played in and re-watch them for whatever benefits that might entail, was actually dangerous for reasons that no one knew. At least one person had gotten posted there, and no omen could be found, so being extraordinarily cautious, the vets had stopped going there, and by the time we showed up, the new vets barely remembered it. Okay, but other than the baby doll, why would we go to Carousel Family Video? Ant-Man asked. That's a bit of a leap. It was actually Isaac's comment that made me realize something. He talked about going to the mall to see if they had a werewolf costume in the costume shop that we were all being told to go to when we went to those outlet stores, I said. Wait, we don't have to go to the mall, do we? Isaac asked. I was just joking around. No, I said. It occurred to me that they would have to have multiple werewolf suits because werewolves always look different in horror movies. I mean, every makeup artist or costume designer wants to put their flair on what werewolves look like, and you can practically guess the movie just by looking at its werewolves. I paused for them to catch up to where I was headed. None of you saw the name of the movie that the werewolves who killed Logan and Avery were from, but you did see the werewolves. You remember what they looked like, don't you? Andrew, Lila, and Michael looked at one another. I'll never forget it, Michael said. Describe them, I said. Andrew, Michael, and Lila exchanged glances once more, and then Michael said, big, hairy, sharp teeth. They were werewolves. I rolled my eyes. Were they bipedal? Were they completely covered in fur? Were they human-shaped and covered in fur, or did they take on a completely wolf-like anatomy? Did they keep their clothes on when they transformed? Did their eyes glow? Did they have a snout, or did their normal mouth just grow sharp teeth? Did it look like they were wearing a monkey suit, or did it look like they had a bunch of fur glued to their skin? Did they perhaps look like they were wearing special contacts to change the shape of their eyes? Could you see their natural hair color after they had transformed? Did they have claws or paws, or still human hands with long nails? Could you tell what a human looked like before the transformation just by looking at the fully transformed wolf? Did they look like demons or animals, or possibly just humans with a bunch of rubber on their faces? Did they get bigger? Did their arms get longer? Did it look like they were wearing masks? Did they have lots of drool? Did their tongues hang out? I took a breath. I can keep going. There are a million different ways that werewolves differ from movie to movie, and I need you to remember the details. Something about my long rant seemed to cause a software malfunction in their brains as they tried to remember exactly what the wolves looked like. I pointed to the man painting caricatures in the corner. And I'm asking you all this because, while that clown is not out killing children, he just happens to be a sketch artist, and they placed him here at the speakeasy where Tar told us to go. They all turned and looked, realization dawning on them all at once. So we identify what the werewolves look like, and then we go look at the covers of the movies at the movie rental store to find the right werewolf, Ant-Man said. You got it, I said. Werewolves are almost always featured on movie covers because the first thing a werewolf fan wants to see is whether the werewolves look stupid. And once we get the title of the storyline, we go look around the bowling alley to find the omen. I already looked in the atlas for stuff about the bowling alley. There's barely anything. Grace and the bowlers were the ones that wrote out most of the pathing around that area, but of course, we don't have access to what they wrote because we have an older version of the atlas from before they would have written it. For some reason, I didn't expect my thoughts to be well received. I thought there would be arguments, but they all seemed genuinely happy to hear what I had to say and how all the elements lined up. If I wasn't wrong, I thought Kimberly looked proud. So that's how the 11 of us sat around a caricature artist who just happened to be a killer clown when the circus was in, as Michael, Andrew, and Lila tried to describe the monsters they had seen kill their friends. His arms were long so that he could run on all fours without bending over too much, Andrew said. I distinctly remember it, this one large, muscular fellow, his arms just seemed to keep lengthening every time I looked at him. I often wish my arms were long enough to run on all fours, Isaac said. He had more than his fair share of the booze. That got a chuckle as the clown and I teamed up to ask more details and questions. What about their faces? I asked. Were they wolf-like or Wolverine with sharp teeth? Definitely like the head of a wolf sewn onto a human body, Lila said. Except, at first, they did just look like humans with sharp teeth. But then I turned my head back, and suddenly they were wolves. The same thing happened to me, Michael said. I never actually saw them transform, it's just that every time I looked back, they were a little bit more wolf-like. Andrew, I asked, is that what you saw too? He nodded. I had thought it was just my imagination, or maybe I was just panicking, but it's true, I never saw them actually transform. That's a common horror movie trope, I said. Saves on the budget. Better to miss out on the transformation than to ruin it with G. Or maybe they could only afford one proper transformation. Humans turning into monsters was an art form in horror movies, and one of the cheapest and most reliable tricks was to have the camera look away during the transformation. Carousel, it seemed, had turned that into an enemy trope. I would have to think about why that would be important or how it would play into the game. As we talked, a picture started to transform and appear on the easel of an unclothed, long-armed, short-clawed, wolf-headed monster with distinct muscular bodies and obvious sexual dimorphism between the males and the females. Apparently, the lady werewolves kept to their curves, an observation that set the creepy clown caricature artist into a laughing frenzy. I, for one, think Carousel made a good call by getting rid of their clothes, Isaac said. They always look goofy with clothes on. By the time we were finished, we had a really good sketch of the monsters we were after, all without risking a trip further into the lair. Now, all that was left was for us to travel to Carousel Family Video and hope that a spooky, crying baby doll could save us from whatever was dangerous about a movie rental store. I just hoped that my theories were right, that the clues we had been given were personalized to us, and that I hadn't gotten carried away. There was no way I was getting sleep that night without the help of my art like a light drop. Book 5 Chapter 60 Carousel Family Video, despite purporting to be a family store, was huge, but it never lost its charm. As I walked inside, I was struck by an invisible wall of nostalgia that didn't belong to me. For as much as I liked watching vintage horror movies growing up, I missed the age of the video rental store by a few years. Sure, when I was a kid, my grandpa would pick up some movies for me to watch, often sneaking them into my backpack when my parents weren't watching. But by the time I was living with my grandparents, most of my movies were bought online in big boxes of assorted VHSs and DVDs and then doled out one at a time every week or so as a reward for doing my homework, completing chores, or maybe just when I looked sad. But here was a huge store, the size of a grocery market, with 2 stories, an upstairs and a downstairs, all devoted to movies, specifically VHS. There were no DVDs to be found. That had to be a stylistic choice. Customers and employees filled the place, just browsing, occasionally checking out a film. As the atlas had led me to expect, there were no omens in the store and no trap items, either. Whatever danger was here truly was unknown. As we filed into the store, Antwan held the crybaby high, like it was some sort of talisman of religious significance, pointing it in different directions, expecting it to start crying, but its little robotic cry never sounded. We must have looked like go-off balls. We had a plan for how we were going to do things, and that plan involved visiting a local hardware store, one of the old ones from the 1920s, where you told a guy behind the counter what you wanted, and he went and got it for you, to buy a length of rope. It just so happened that the length of rope the guy brought back to us had a really cool trop called No Bad News. This trop made it so that it would tangle around the neck of its target during first blood, second blood, or the final battle and form an impromptu, entirely accidental noose. They would fall, their neck would snap, or it would look like it, that sort of thing. I laughed when the guy handed it to us because I had seen the trop in countless movies, including Tarzan. It was a very dour subject, but at the end of the day, it always tickled me a little when I recognized a trop from movies I had watched, and it happened all the time in Carousel. We didn't need the length of rope to strangle any bad guys, or good guys, for that matter, because it would work on whoever got tangled in it. We needed it to help us keep the group together. When we walked into the video store, we each had the rope tied to us somehow. I just looped it through a couple of my belt loops, as did pretty much everyone else with jeans. Other people had to get more creative, but that's how we decided to solve our problem of people potentially going missing. We literally tied ourselves together. Fortunately, none of the patrons of the store seemed to care that we were all tied together, though I could have sworn I saw some NPCs stifling a chuckle as they looked at us. Some even stared. As with bicycle helmets, if you don't feel ridiculous, then you haven't taken enough precautions. After we had all made it into the store, we just looked at each other and laughed because it was such a silly scenario. We were so afraid of this place that seemed so normal, almost more normal than any other place in Carousel, because it had no omens, and if you didn't focus on things, it just looked like a normal store. We looked like a scene out of The Descent. I had to clear my mind and get my head straight. We were there to find a movie with the werewolf that a murderous clown has sketched out for us, the one that had killed Logan and Avery. We were not there to browse in general, but I found clearing my mind to be very difficult because this place was so exciting. I realized that because no one else seemed to be nearly as amazed as I was because of Kimberly. "Riley, you're smiling," she said as soon as she got a good look at me. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "What can I say? This place is awesome." "He's in his natural habitat," Ant-Man said. "All right, everybody, check the knots. We need to make sure we've got Riley secured." Did I really smile so rarely that it was a cause for alarm? "Listen up," Antoine continued, reiterating the plan that we high-savvy players had made. He was the Fred to our Velmas. "We're going together. We'll check every row multiple times. We have no reason to be in a hurry. Make sure you get a good look at every movie that looks like it might have a werewolf in it. I don't need to tell you how dangerous an unknown threat is." So, Antoine's little speech was cut off because someone screamed from deeper into the store. It wasn't a scared or injured scream, they were screaming a name. Kimberly Madison. They called from across the store, and then a man in his mid-20s, wearing a red hoodie and a lanyard, came running toward us. "It's really you," he said as he approached the group. His name on the red wallpaper was Gus, just Gus, no last name, and he had normal plot armor, like a regular NPC. His hair was long, but not as long as mine was getting. He looked like a general geek, the overly excited kind, not the sulky kind like me. We were silent at first because this was the sort of thing that never happened outside of a storyline unless you were getting jumped by an omen. "Do I know you?" Kimberly asked. He chuckled awkwardly. "Well, of course, you don't know me," he said. "But I know you. I've got your poster hanging on the back wall." He turned around and looked for a spot on the back, pointing his finger, and sure enough, there was a poster of Kimberly. It was from the diecast, just a character poster like one might see on the red wallpaper. "I just have to say, I am such a big fan. I've watched everything you've been in," he said. "Go on, ask me anything about your entire career, and I can tell you." Honestly, I was taken aback by this sort of treatment from an NPC outside of a storyline, but Kimberly was a lot faster on her feet, So she did have a question. How did I get started as an actress? She said, not with any particular curiosity, but as if she was just testing the waters to see how meta this guy was going to get. Easy, he said. You came to Carousel chasing some boy, I forget his name, ended up doing some not so well-received horror movies, let's be honest, but you were the best thing in them half the time. You ended up getting discovered, as they say in the biz, by Salvatore Morowitz when he saw you in The Final Straw, and now you're probably one of the most famous actresses in Carousel. That was one way of putting things, a made-up story constructed from elements of truth. She had chosen her celebrity aspect after The Final Straw, though technically Sal, her fictional talent agent, was already representing her within the made-up continuity of her career earlier than Gus said. But I would let that slide. Things were getting a little meta. I had to assume that was what was going on. Gus recognized Kimberly as a celebrity eye candy. But by that logic, was it possible that he knew who I was? I also had a meta aspect related to filmmaking, so I was certain he knew who I was. And it wasn't me being conceited, it was because he was dressed exactly like me, in my exact hoodie, with jeans and even Converse sneakers. But his attention was on Kimberly. As amusing as all of this would be when we talked about it later back at the loft, at the moment, we were actually quite afraid because we were looking for something to go wrong. With every breath, I was listening for the crybaby to start wailing, but it never did. Well, Gus, Kimberly said, pointing to his lanyard and the name tag at the end of it, pretending that she didn't just look at him on the red wallpaper, can you help us find some werewolf movies? Maybe one that takes place on a mountain. That was a good question, one that sounded like the kind of thing he could answer. Every section in the store was marked as horror. How helpful. To their credit, they also listed subgenres. Unfortunately, none of those subgenres were werewolves. They were things like romance, thrillers, mysteries, and crime stories. That was where our leads ran dry. We didn't know what kind of horror story this werewolf movie was supposed to be. Luckily, most werewolf movies were straight-up horror and weren't particularly gimmicky as far as genre goes. Still, if Gus could help us, that would be a godsend, though I wouldn't be able to say which godsend it. I love werewolf movies. Are you going to do a werewolf movie? Gus said, still focused on Kimberly. Are you here doing research? Do you need my help? Yes, Kimberly said. We're doing research for a werewolf movie, and we need to find one that takes place on a mountain. Well, I don't know if we can search based on where it takes place, Gus said. And unfortunately, we don't organize the movies by what monster is in them, but I would be glad to help. He was really playing up the excited fan angle, and despite the fact that he was a normal NPC on the red wallpaper, I couldn't help but feel something was going on. Unlike the other NPCs, who were gawking at us for the whole tying ourselves together thing, he had yet to acknowledge it. But what really made me think something was going on was the way he looked at me when he turned and waved for us to follow him. It was a knowing look, with a grin and everything, that only lasted a second, but he met my eyeline perfectly. Was my "I don't like it here" trop giving me anxiety? No, it wasn't. In fact, ever since we walked into this store, it hadn't been making a peep. And I doubted it was my psychic background throwing me a bone. What alerted me was my natural distrust of people, and I did not trust this guy, even though I could not find one objective reason. But still, if we ever hoped to leave Carousel, we couldn't run away from everything we distrusted. So, when he turned and walked away with his goofy demeanor, we followed cautiously. And for 30 minutes, 30 whole minutes, Gus didn't do anything to make me think he was up to no good. He just guided us down various aisles, picked up werewolf tapes, and showed them to us. And in 30 minutes, we found nothing. Luckily, nothing found us either. Wait a minute, Dinah said, and then she managed to point something out to us that we had somehow managed not to notice in all of our searches. With every werewolf movie he presented to us, we did not notice it because we were looking in the wrong place. Look at this, she said. She grabbed a movie off the shelf and held it out to us. On the cover, There was a beautiful vampire queen, almost exposed and definitely enticing. But that was not what Dinah wanted us to look at. She wanted us to look at two of the characters who were on the cover of the movie, but not the center of it. They were simply reacting in horror or amazement, I couldn't quite tell, to the central figure. And darn if I didn't recognize one of them. His name was Sam. I didn't have a whole lot of history with him other than the fact that we were both trapped in the nightmare world together, but I did know him. He was one of the vets at Camp Dyer. He was an adventurer, an advanced archetype, originally an athlete, a health nut who would actually go out on jogs every morning from the day he got his first scouting trap that made it quasi-safe for him to do. He was on the cover of this movie. That was not something we anticipated. And even as we looked at movie after movie that Gus showed us, we had not put it together. The covers of these VHS tapes had characters on them, and not just the original characters from the universe of the movie, but they had the players who had last played them on them. We hadn't even thought of it because the atlas didn't say anything. And more than that, we had spent so much time looking at movie posters on the red wallpaper, which didn't change based on the players inside of them, that it never occurred to us that the VHS covers might. And that simple insight was enough for Dinah to ask, "Hey Gus, can we look up movies by who's in them? Like, who stars in them?" "Of course," Gus said. "How else would you follow your favorite actor?" We all looked at each other and suddenly realized what Dinah was up to. It was so simple that we felt like fools for not thinking of it. To be fair, she was old enough to have been able to actually go to movie rental stores for much of her formative years. "Can we see all the movies starring Grace Varga?" she asked. Those were the clues we had. Madame Celia's cryptic riddle seemed to point us to the bowlers. We had assumed that meant we would eventually have to check for the storyline around the bowling alley, but what if it meant something more than that? What if it was a clue that could help us not spend days searching through the massive amount of films in this store? What if we were directed to the bowlers because they were the last players to play the werewolf storyline that we were looking for? "Sure," Gus said. "I'll have to go get the list from the back if you'll follow me." And here's where he started acting strange again because it was almost like his plans had been ruined just a little bit. But only just. But still, we followed him, this time at a longer distance, on my insistence, as he showed us around to the back of the store, a desolate area where even some of the shelves were sparsely populated. The lights flickered back here. And that is where I saw something I was not looking for. At the back of the store, there was a wide doorway leading to a hall. Right across from that doorway was another door that was closed. It had a movie poster on it, which wasn't so remarkable because most places had a poster on them in this place. But it was notable because the poster featured a grotesque eyeball, with the nerve and everything attached. The movie was called Archive Esoterica, but that didn't matter. To the left was a stairway going up, but not up onto the second story of movies. The stairway for that was in the center of the shop. Besides, the doorway had an employees-only sign. To the right of the door with the eyeball poster on it was another stairway I could just make out, and it went downward into darkness. Gus went upstairs. As he started jogging up the steps, I noticed that he passed yet another poster, another one littering the walls. It was one of many, many of which were torn from people walking up and down the stairs. But I noticed that there was a very particular poster just out of my line of sight. I started moving forward, trying to crane my neck so I could see further upstairs and get a better look at this movie poster that seemed to call to me in a way that did not register on the red wallpaper or anywhere else. It called to me because I recognized it just from looking at the corner of it, the bottom right corner. And as I got closer, I knew what it was. It was different than all the others. Untouched, pristine, literally taped on top of some that were already hung in that little hallway moving up the stairs. That movie poster did not have a title, just a blank space filled with underscores, as if the title had yet to be written. The photo was taken in front of a carnival ride. It featured 3 people, 2 parents and a child, a man, a woman, and a boy. I knew them well because one of them was me. This picture had hung in our house when I was a child. My parents. On an unfinished poster for the movie. Carousel had been teasing me for so long, and now it showed them to me. Book 5 Chapter 61 Ramona was the first to notice that something was wrong. "Riley, are you okay?" she asked, or something like that. I wasn't paying attention. I just needed to get a closer look at the poster because there was a block of text at the bottom of the poster, and I needed to read what was in that text. I walked forward without thinking about it, just trying to get close enough to make out what those letters said. That was all. I wasn't going to follow Gus up the stairs. I just needed to read what it said because it did say something, and I could tell that the first word was you. I pulled forward, and I could feel the rope tugging at my belt loop because the others were not nearly as interested in following me. They even started making a commotion about it. I wasn't really paying attention to what they were saying and didn't notice them, particularly until Antwan grabbed my arm. "What is wrong with you?" he screamed because the back of the store, with its barren shelves and flickering lights, had scared them. I didn't respond to him. "What are you looking at?" he asked, following my gaze. I didn't know if he recognized me as a kid or if he just noticed how central and prominent that poster was, but he managed to put together what was going on. "Oh, dude," he said, a bit transfixed himself. "I just need to get close enough to read it," I said. "I'm not gonna go in the hallway." I wriggled a bit out of his arms because he wasn't holding that tight once he saw the poster, and as I took another step forward, I could see more of what the poster said. "You never know where you'll find." I tried to read more, but the text was too small, so I took another step and a piercing wail broke through the store, louder than any scream I had heard. It was a baby crying. That snapped me out of it. I looked back at Kimberly, who was now the one holding the crybaby because Antwan was still grabbing onto my arm. The crybaby was crying its haunted, staticky cry. And suddenly, my curiosity was replaced with fear because I realized that had we not had that crybaby and had we not been tied together, whatever danger we were being warned of would have consumed me. As I looked back at my friends, I saw something rare. I saw Dinah crying. And when she noticed I was looking at her, she pointed back toward the hallway with the eyeball poster, the stairway going up, and the stairway going down. "Don't you remember?" she asked. "This is what Sean was warning about. Look at it." I looked back at it and realized that we had been warned about this place, even though we didn't know it. When we ran permanent vacancy and then used Samantha's damsel trap to make it a supernatural story, Dinah's trap that allowed her to communicate, either literally or metaphorically, with her dead loved ones went into overdrive. Her son, or at least something that looked like him, had come in spectral form and kept her safe from the zombies we had summoned. As a parting gift, she told me her son had warned about this very place, about a choice to go upstairs, downstairs, or through a door with an eyeball on it. Something about that warning had felt so out of place that I dismissed it, and we hadn't spoken of it since. But here it was. When you have the choice to go upstairs, downstairs, or through a door with an eyeball on it, the choice I was supposed to make had been given to us explicitly clear. "Downstairs first," I said. Dinah nodded. Almost on instinct, I took another step toward the hallway, but as soon as I did, the baby started to cry again, this time even louder. We just stood there as Antwan relayed what he had seen on the poster to the others. "Am I supposed to go down there?" I asked Dinah as if she would know the answer. "Yeah," she said. "That's the whole point of the warning. You have to go downstairs. Don't you want to know where this is going?" And I did, of course I did, but by then, any time I even thought about moving toward the stairs, the baby started to cry. There was a danger there, something that we could not know. I looked around, seeking permission to go anyway. I didn't know if I would, but I couldn't shake the desire to just know the truth, whatever the cost. Yet a feeling, like dread, moved over me, centered in my heart and not in the back of my neck like normal. I knew that I was not going to go. I knew that it was not happening. I walked back toward the group and realized they were debating things, and all of them but one had come out on the side of me not going down the murder staircase. I felt the rope in my fingers and traced it back to my belt loops. I couldn't go, even if I wanted to. That lasted long enough for me to get some of my wits back and realize that it would be a stupid decision. Even with Dinah's little warning from beyond the grave, it would be a dumb decision to see what was down there. And yet, there was another problem, a deeper horror, as I realized that I was never going to just get over it. Even as I stood there, realizing my breath was fast and that I was sweating, I knew I would toss and turn over this simple question: what was in the basement of Carousel Family Video? I could hear them arguing, still with me, kind of, but mostly with themselves because I wasn't participating. He should go look. He has to pull the thread. I have to know why my son told him to go downstairs, Dinah said. No one else was having it, but Dinah persisted. I hated the discussion being about something involving me. I didn't like being the center of attention, so as Dinah argued about how we were supposed to take risks and how this was a huge development, I said, "We'll have to wait." My ears popped, and suddenly, I was back in reality, standing at the back of the store. "What?" Dinah asked. "Wait until when?" I took a deep breath. "Wait until we're strong enough that it doesn't matter what's down there," I said. "Don't you want to know?" "We were supposed to go there," she said. Of course, she would say that. This was the woman who came to Carousel knowing what was here to save her son, so of course, she was going to be on the side of pulling the thread. "We'll wait until we're so high level that there's no risk," I said. "Besides, I doubt that this is required. It's a side quest, clearly." I didn't know if I believed that. One thing I did believe was that none of anything in Carousel was supposed to be about me, and the thought of that comforted me. I was just an afterthought, invited on a whim. That's what I told myself. I'm not chasing a picture of my family to my doom. None of it was supposed to be about me. Before Dinah could respond, a young woman with a long brown ponytail, wearing a polo with the logo of Carousel Family Video on it, appeared behind us. Her name was Vangy on the red wallpaper. She was a standard NPC, just like Gus had been, except more believable. "I'm not even gonna ask what the rope is about," she said in a chipper customer service tone. We all turned to look at her. "Can't I help you find anything?" she asked. We took a moment to shift gears. "We're looking for a werewolf movie starring Grace Varga," I said. I needed to leave that space. "Sounds like you like mysteries," she responded. "Follow me, I'll go look it up in the database." She led us to the front of the store, where the checkout area was, logged into a computer with a black screen filled with green text, and started typing really loudly. "Alrighty," she said, "I have a list of all of Grace Varga's films. Do you have any idea what the title is?" "I don't see any that have the word werewolf in them, of course. That would be too convenient." "Can't I see the list?" I asked. "Sure," she said, rotating the computer monitor around for me to see clearly. I looked through the list. I found the strings attached, as well as every single movie that I remembered from the bowling alley. I continued looking through the list. "That's gotta be it," I said. "Number 26? She turned the screen back around. "Straight on, the mark," she said. "That's aisle 42, section 6, and it looks like we have it in stock. You can go check it out. If it's not there, just tell me." It seemed to me that the word stray worked for a werewolf movie well, as did the word dawn. We practically ran, in one big blob of people tied together, to aisle 42, which was upstairs, the staircase in the middle of the store, not in the back, section 6. As soon as we got there, it practically jumped out at us. The cover featured Grace, our favorite detective, dressed like she was about to have a night out. I could practically smell the hairspray from the way her hair was done. Beside her was Bella, a bully bruiser on the bowlers team, as expected. On the side of the VHS, there was an illustration of the fully transformed werewolf from the movie. We all celebrated and hugged each other because we had succeeded in finding the film. To the best of our knowledge, it all just fit together so well. Not only did the werewolf match the drawing we had the clown do, but it had the bowlers in it. Some secrets were never meant to see the dawn, and one read from the cover of the movie. It was a late single quote 80s, early single-90s looking movie with lots of punk angst, ironically starring women in their 30s and something that looked like it was designed to appeal to teenagers. Do we have to buy it first to read the back? Kimberly asked. What did the atlas say? Reading the back is not spoilers, but they did insist that you paid to rent the movie if you're going to read it, I said. It was a real gamble. In the real world, the back matter of a VHS tape could spoil the entire plot, or it could spoil absolutely nothing. There was no way to tell until you read it. But I was confident that the atlas knew what it was talking about. I also just couldn't resist. I turned the VHS over, and Antoine read off the synopsis. After fleeing their broken past, sisters Grace and Bella arrive in the isolated town of Carousel, searching for a fresh start. However, their plans unravel when Bella is drawn into the seductive world of a mysterious group of outsiders led by the charismatic and dangerous Serena. As Bella falls deeper under their spell, Grace is left torn between saving her sister and saving herself from the dark secrets that linger in Carousel. With time running out and trust slipping away, Grace must confront her deepest fears to prevent Bella from straying too far into the night. It was an angsty, emotional werewolf movie. Checking out was a breeze, and as we walked out of the store, our moods could not have been higher. I almost forgot about the call of the poster with my family on it and the question of what lay beneath Carousel Family Video. Almost. Book 5 Chapter 62 With an abundance of caution, we decided not to go to the bowling alley immediately but rather to head back to the loft to do some research. Now that we knew the name of the storyline, or at least were reasonably confident that we were on the money, we could do some digging. The only way to confirm that this was the right storyline, unfortunately, was to find the actual omen and see if the missing posters of Logan and Ava reappeared on it when we were near it. It wasn't that I didn't trust the mini quest we were on. It was that I didn't need to trust when I could verify. If we had the most recent copy of the atlas, we would have all kinds of details about the bowling alley, even if it was missing a whole bunch of older stuff. But since we had the older version, Grace and her team weren't around to map out how to navigate that area. Luckily, we weren't going to try bowling or hanging out indefinitely. We just needed to get in and get out, and I was confident that my scouting trap would be sufficient for that. On the one occasion we had gone to the bowling alley before, I was able to anticipate most or all of the problems that Grace and her team had studied, even if I didn't know how the individual mobile omens would behave. Avoiding them would not be a problem, but we would certainly not be able to bowl a whole set. As soon as we got back to the loft, we sat in the living room crisscross applesauce because we didn't have enough chairs for everyone, so it was first come, first served. Meanwhile, Kimberly whipped out her phone and dialed up her talent agent, Sal. It only rang for half a ring. Kimberly, sometimes it feels like you only call me when you need to ask about a role, Sal said as soon as he picked up. You try to tell me about a role every time I call anyway, she said. You got me there, sweetheart. What can I help you with? He said. What can you tell me about the movie Stray Dawn, The Mark? She asked. Huh? Well, that one is a remake, Sal said. Let me look through my stacks. We listened as he shuffled through papers. I had to wonder if the NPC playing Sal was just fumbling through random sheets of paper or if he actually had information or scripts in front of him. Oh, here we go, Sal said. That one was already made a few years ago. It was a moderate hit, but, you know, they do have a script floating around for Stray Dawn. I don't know if it's a reboot or a remake, or heck, this might actually be the original script. I can poke around if you're interested. Kimberly muted the phone and looked up at me. That was not a response we had gotten from Sal before. He would usually tell us about any story, even stories that we were grossly incompatible with. She's the detective advanced archetype, I said. Stray Dawn, The Mark is probably a version of the movie that was altered by her advanced archetype, so we can't run it. Kimberly nodded. She unmuted the phone and said, All right, tell me everything you know about Stray Dawn. I made some notes when I first read this script, and I have to say, this one will be a little bit of a challenge for you. It's an older stylistic horror with some ancient curse involved. Honestly, if you ask me, it's a bit of a clash. On the one hand, you have this angsty, emotional teen story that takes center stage, and on the other hand, you have a much older, more ancient backstory that I think doesn't get the attention it deserves. That was sell for you, details without details. Do you know where it's set? Kimberly asked. Yeah, just something about a gothic mansion in southern Carousel, though I think most of the shots of Carousel proper are from southeastern Carousel. I imagine they'll try to make it look like those two places are close together, but I don't know. Whatever the case, there are no big city sites for this story. I know you'll hate that. Can you tell me anything about my character? Kimberly asked. A fish out of water who's new to town and just trying to fit in. It's that type of thing. It's one of those frustrating stories that's about finding yourself when all the audience actually wants to know about is the cool lore, the mystery, and the background characters. Anything else you can tell me? Kimberly asked. Anything about the difficulty or the plot? I've forgotten the plot, and I didn't make a note about it, but that was probably because it didn't really have an effect on me. This is a coming-of-age sort of thing, probably not that complicated if you follow me. I will say there's some brutal, bloody stuff in this that'll probably get cut out for TV, Sal said. From what he was talking about, there was good news and bad news. From the sound of it, the storyline was too challenging to get much concrete information using her talent agent drop. But on the other hand, it wasn't going to be too far out of our league because he wasn't exactly tight-lipped like he was when you asked him about a storyline that was just too strong. Alright, Kimberly said. I'll give you a call later. Ciao, Sal said, and he hung up the phone. That doesn't sound right, Andrew said. It's on the mountain near the Powerworks Pavilion. I don't remember there being a gothic mansion up there, and if there were, surely that would be the location listed on Logan and Avery's missing posters. I had similar thoughts. It has to be, Ant-Man said. It would be too much of a coincidence if we just happened to find a very similar werewolf in a storyline that's completely unrelated. Plus, the Powerworks Pavilion is as southern as Carousel goes. There's only one way to know for sure, I said. We have to actually take the missing posters and get eyes on the omen. Until then, we're just guessing. And let's not forget that we don't actually know how missing posters work. For all we know, the Powerworks Pavilion is just listed as their place of death because it's the nearest major setting. We talked for a bit about our plans, and most of us were in agreement. In the morning, we were going to the bowling alley, but this time we weren't bringing everyone. This wasn't a relaxing time out or a shopping trip. This was surveillance, and we needed to move quickly and be ready in case we encountered a problem. As I sat at the kitchen table, continuing a fruitless search for any information about the bowling alley from our outdated version of the Atlas, Kimberly, Antoine, and Dinah approached me. Can we talk? Kimberly asked. I'll have to check my schedule, I said, but I smiled so they'd know I was really saying yes. What do you want to talk about? I asked. We need to discuss what happened today at Carousel Family Video, Ant-Man said. I was puzzled. Hasn't that been what we've been talking about all day? I mean, we've been planning this trip to the bowling alley since before we even knew what storyline we were looking for. They looked at each other with a concerned gaze that made me uncomfortable. We're talking about that poster, Kimberly said. Why were your parents on the poster? Those were your parents, right? Oh, that, I said. I thought for a moment, then replied, Carousel's just messing with me. It has been since the beginning, talking about my grandparents, just teasing me, that sort of thing. Why would it put a picture of your parents, and you, on what looked like a storyline poster? That is what we're asking, Ant-Man said. I shrugged. Like I told you, it's just teasing me. It's trying to lure me back there, so I'll fall for whatever trap it was the crybaby warned us about. Just Carousel being Carousel. The others didn't seem so sure. Well, don't you want to know what's going on there? Ant-Man pressed. Why would Dinah's son's ghost tell you to go downstairs, but the baby warns you there's a danger if you walk in the direction. I don't know why, I said. We won't know until we try it, and we agreed to put it off. If we don't pull the thread, the sweater stays together. Just because we're putting off actually going there doesn't mean we can't discuss it, Antoine replied. Was that a real picture of your parents, and you, on the poster? I nodded. We took it on a trip to Six Flags, or some theme park, maybe a carnival, I don't remember. I was too young. But it was in our house, the picture. I don't know why Carousel put it on a poster, but probably just to mess with me, like I've been telling you over and over again. They paused, exchanging glances again, which was really starting to bother me. They were acting like I'd been diagnosed with some strange, deadly illness. I thought you were an orphan, Kimberly said. That's what Anna said, that your parents died. I didn't talk about that. So, if you know, why do you need to talk to me about it? I asked. Because we're concerned, Antoine said. How did Carousel know you'd be drawn to a poster with your parents on it? Because it's human nature, I replied. If it had been a poster of your brother, you'd have tried to read what it said. Yeah, Antoine said, but my brother was literally in Carousel and died here. Your parents died over a decade before we even got here, didn't they? I'm telling you, I said, standing up from my seat. Carousel just likes to mess with me. That's why it talks about my grandparents. That's why it got Dinah's ghost son to try to lure me into a trap. Actually, I'm not sure what was going on there, but the point is, it likes to mess with me. I mean, it gave me my old TV just a few days ago. Your old TV? Ant-Man asked. That's why Candyman isn't there, isn't it? I couldn't figure out why or how you got a movie from our world. Riley, Kimberly said, why wouldn't you tell us that? I did tell you that I had one just like that as a kid. I don't know if it's the same one, I said. I figured the details could wait until we decided to act on it. If Carousel is starting something, or if God forbid, a narrator is doing this, we need to know. We deserve to know. Didn't you think of that? Antoine asked, coming around the table to look directly at me. I had considered it. After all, Dinah's little premonition about going downstairs had come to her right after Project Rewind was completed, which just so happened to be around the time Silas Dearcon had tried to trick us. So, presumably, it could have been a narrator. Well, thank goodness we didn't go down those stairs. And until we do, we'll never know what's going on, I said. I mean, does knowing about it change any? How did your parents die? Dinah interrupted. That poster, it had this off-color warping effect like it was supposed to be spooky or something, but it just looked like a family having a good time. So I'm asking, how did your parents die? I really didn't want to talk about it. Murder. Robbery gone wrong, maybe, I said. They were just killed. I never got answers. The case went unsolved. Of course, I was both telling the truth and lying. I didn't know why they had been killed or who had done it. I knew it was brutal. It was hard enough on my grandparents and they only saw photos. All I remembered was that I was watching a movie when it happened, and my grandparents didn't let the police tell me anything more than I already knew. I never asked. And I tried not to remember. For so long, it had worked so well. Talking about my parents was one of my weak points. I was crying by then, and I could tell the others felt bad because they stopped acting angry or inquisitive. I think Kimberly even tried to hug me, but I just went to my room. I didn't know why Carousel was teasing me about my parents, and I really did not want to find out. I had lived with the unanswered questions surrounding their deaths my whole life, but I didn't want to learn those answers now. Not here. Not in Carousel. Personally, I just wanted to bring myself, Antoine, Kimberly, Dinah, and Bobby, but Andrew and Michael insisted on coming. While Lila would have liked to, she did not speak up, so she didn't get to go. Since we wanted to keep our group small, Bobby stayed home, and the rest of us hiked out to the bowling alley with nothing but the ghost of a memory of how to stay safe there. Luckily, We didn't need to be as exacting as the bowlers were. As we approached, everything was as I remembered it, including the woman talking to her reflection in the building's window. We knew a few things we had to do, like not interacting with the mobile omens, locking the doors, and flipping the closed sign around when we wanted certain patrons not to enter the bowling alley. Still, we did not remember the exact sequence or timing as Grace had determined it. We also didn't plan on being there long enough for it to matter. The bowling alley didn't actually have a name. It was just called a bowling alley. Whatever its name was had been ripped off the roof of the building. From what remained of the letters, my money was on memory lanes. As I stared at it, I could still see the struts designed to hold a large sign up there. If I didn't know any better, that looked like some sort of indication of danger, but I couldn't say what danger it was referring to. Andrew, do you remember any of the safety precautions that the bowlers used to do? Antoine asked as we approached the building. I regret to admit that I was not interested in the subject matter when Grace and the bowlers showed us the alley. I came because it seemed impolite to turn down their offer, Andrew said. That was similar to how I had treated the whole event. My only interest was in learning the concept of how to clear an area, not to learn the bowling alley specifically. Unsurprisingly, I barely remembered it. That being said, we're in, then we're out, Antoine said. I could probably go in alone, I said. I mean, let's face it, without any scouting tropes, I'm not sure how useful the rest of you will be in there. No offense. We'll be really useful if you accidentally trigger an omen, Michael said. Then you're going to need some muscle. I didn't say anything in response, but I would certainly say something if he ended up triggering something because he couldn't see the omens or wasn't even trying to look. With that, Antoine led us across the street and into the building. It looked like an ordinary bowling alley from back in the real world. I could hear the sound of pins crashing and balls rolling across the wood. People were laughing, and the child's birthday that had been there on our first trip to the bowling alley wasn't even happening, which was good because there was apparently a pretty risky mobile omen associated with it. What do you got, Radar? Michael said, looking at me. Don't call me that, I said. I really didn't need a nickname, especially one that came with a job. The bowling bag is an omen. Don't touch it. I continued scanning around the room. Something is unscrewing the bolts to that neon sign on the wall. It's an omen, something tough, and there's something invisible. Don't go anywhere near it. It won't activate unless the sign falls and hits you. That day was not a dense one for omens at the bowling alley. Of course, the real danger of the alley is if you spent too much time there, because so many omens moved in and out. At any one time, there might not be that many, but throughout the day, many cycled through. There's a trap item over in the glass prize box, Andrew observed. I looked over and found it quite hilarious. The trap item was a container of string gum, like chewing gum, but in string form, and it had a trap called She Caught Her Own Killer that guaranteed there would be some piece of evidence linking the victim to the killer in the act of killing. It was a Scholar Sleuth trap. But how would that work? Kimberly asked. How does bubble gum link to the killer? That one had me scratching my head. Any explanation that I could come up with sounded convoluted. I almost wanted to win the prize just so I could test it out to figure out what the heck a pack of chewing gum was going to do to help you solve a murder, even with a powerful trap like that attached. Trap objects were very new, so deciding how the trap would apply wasn't an exact science yet. Maybe the killer gets the bubble gum on their shoe. Andrew said. Gumshoe, I said. That has to be it. It's a pun. Had I seen any movies where a killer was found out because they got the victim's bubble gum stuck to the bottom of their shoe? I tried to remember. In fact, I had only seen one such instance on an episode of Monk. As we were talking about it, somewhere in the arcade someone must have won something, because the lights started flashing and noises started dinging. But when I looked over there, no one was there. I continued to search around the small food service area and along the lanes and checked every bowling ball. There were two different balls with tropes attached. One was Antoine's athlete trop, which allowed him to bring a sports implement into a storyline and gave it bonus damage in melee combat. The other one was called Clutter Collateral, a comedian stooge drop that made it so that when the enemy crashed into a shelf or something with lots of objects on it, the objects would fall on them and cause extra damage. In this case, the object was a bowling ball. I continued looking around and found additional omens here and there, including an omen that was nothing but a foul odor near one of the walls in the bowling alley by the bathroom. Except the odor wasn't from the bathroom. It was from something inside the wall. The omen was triggered by breaking through the drywall. The storyline was called After Hours, as far as I could tell, and it was a really easy storyline. Guys, there's nothing here, I said. No omens anything like what we're looking for, just all the normal bowling alley omens. Maybe we should check the back again, Andrew suggested. No, I said. There's a dangerous omen at the back door. We need to regroup outside because being in here is dangerous. We can't just give up, Michael said. You said that a lot of omens show up and travel around the bowling alley, so maybe we just need to stay here and wait it out. We can watch them enter the bowling alley from outside, I said. We don't have to wait in here where it's dangerous. Why are we even saying that the omen is at the bowling alley? Michael said. If the riddle was about the bowlers, it was because they were in the movie. That doesn't mean that the omen is at the bowling alley. Are we just wasting our time here? Do we even have any idea where the omen is? I understood his frustration, but I was starting to get annoyed by it. The bowlers spend a lot of time here, Ant-Man said. If they ran that storyline, I'd bet anything that the omen is around here somewhere. It just makes sense. That was our logic originally. We thought the bowling elements of the riddle that Madame Celia had given us might be a clue that the omen was at the bowling alley. But then it turned out that it was a clue that the bowlers themselves had been the last ones to run the werewolf storyline we were looking for. Still, the bowlers were called that for a reason, and if that omen existed, it was likely nearby. We were out of clues. That had to be it. Let's take a break, Ant-Man said. That sounds fair, Andrew agreed. We can stake out the entrance and see what comes by. He mainly was talking to Michael, whose patience was growing thin and who reacted to his own worry with irritation. Book 5 Chapter 63 Nothing has walked in the bowling alley in the last 40 minutes, Michael said. Are we even sure that this stuff happens when players aren't around? Maybe if we went in there, it happens whether players are there or not, Andrew said. You know that. I know you want to find that omen as much as I do, but you have to be patient. This is a large undertaking. We waited at the corner of the street across from the bowling alley, in a place where there was very little activity of any kind, whether it be NPCs or omens. I sat under a tree and scanned around, looking for danger. Kimberly had brought the baby doll along, but it hadn't screamed even once. And one came over and sat next to me. So, you got any ideas? He asked. People are getting a little antsy. Truthfully, I wasn't sure, and if I was being honest, I was starting to believe that the omen we were looking for might not be in the bowling alley. When we talked to Sal, he said that Stray Dunn was set at a mansion in southern Carousel and that the town footage would be southeast Carousel, I said. Like eastern Carousel, there were other sections of Carousel that acted as separate towns in storylines. Right, Ant-Man said. You think we need to go look over there? In southern Carousel? I shook my head. No, I said. I like our theory. The bowlers played basically every storyline within their level range that existed in this area. So, do we need to fan out? He asked. Figure out where the omen is? Maybe they left the bowling alley in search of new storylines? Yes, but it's more than that, I said. If the story is mostly set in South and Southeast Carousel, I imagine it doesn't start here because this is basically Central, West Central Carousel. Yeah, nowhere near where the movie is set, he said. So what does that mean? Well, if the omen is found here as we theorized, but the story is not triggered here, it could be like those in the library, where as soon as you trigger it, a bunch of NPCs start pushing you toward wherever the setting is, one way or another, through bits of dialogue or some sort of narrative device. Or, I paused to think. Or? Ant-Man asked. Or? You could just purchase the omen over here and run it somewhere else, I said. He nodded enthusiastically. A purchasable omen, he repeated. So we need to look for a shop. That's what I'm thinking, I said. But again, it could just be an omen that is placed in a silly area. Places like the library or even the hospital sometimes had a bunch of omens that weren't set in those places, but that was kind of their gimmick. That was not the norm necessarily. And one stood up and quickly raised his voice. Everybody, gather up. We've got a plan. Everyone was eager to do something other than wait and watch a bowling alley, so they came from where they had been waiting. Riley thinks that the omen might be a purchasable omen, so we need to find stores nearby where the bowlers might have found the omen we're looking for. We didn't even have to look. What about the For Your Life flea market? Kimberly said. A block over, there's a whole lot with a bunch of different booths selling clothes and furniture. We could get some more chairs. Of course, Kimberly knew where the nearest shopping venue was. We'll start there, Ant-Man said. But we're not buying chairs from a flea market. We're going to steal them from storylines like proper players. Interior decorating was a high-risk, low-reward pastime in Carousel. It didn't take long to find the flea market that Kimberly was talking about. I barely even remembered it being there because the last time we had seen it was when we were loaded into a bus, running away from the black snow, and all the omens were deactivating like bubble wrap popping in a microwave. Alright, stay with me, I said, and I must have said it with some intensity because they all got really close to me. When I moved, they moved. That was a good thing because the flea market was filled with omens, cursed and haunted objects, as well as lots of trop items. It also had tons of old-looking props and vintage clothes. Alright, at first glance, it looks like the omens are constrained to the shelves and the tables, so don't touch anything unless you've really given it a good look, I said. Even then, don't touch anything. There were probably lots of items that we could have bought there, but I wasn't looking for them, and frankly, we were running low on cash from our recent shopping spree. The flea market was one of my favorite types of places in Carousel, in its own way, because a lot of the omens had NPCs interacting with them and adding little narrative flair. A woman was haggling to purchase an old desk, claiming that it was her father's but that it was sold in an estate sale without her knowledge. She didn't have enough for the purchase. The storyline was called the Bureau of Investigation, and it was a pretty difficult one. It was triggered by bringing the desk to your base and unlocking its clues, whatever that meant. I liked it because I thought it was a fine name for a storyline and a beautiful desk. This is where we need to take Cassie, Kimberly said. I nodded. Yeah, there are lots of cursed and haunted things here that she could use for her curios and trinkets drop. Well, that and the clothes here are just her style, she said, eyeing a clothing rack that looked like it was taken from the set of an early single-quote 90s counterculture movie. There were plants for sale, including one that was clearly moving under its own power, an omen for a movie called Gordiculture. As I looked around with a mix of panic because I was surrounded by dangerous omens and amazement because I was also surrounded by really cool omens, I started to hear a conversation getting heated. I told you, one of the voices said, I am not here to purchase paintings. I am here to sell paintings. I buy mine from estate auctions and other events where I can check their provenance. I do not have anyone here to authenticate this specimen. If you would like to take it 6 blocks that way, there is an antique shop that might have more interest. As if someone selling paintings at a flea market would care about provenance. Just $60, another voice said. Come on, you're already set up to sell paintings. Just look at it. You don't need it authenticated. It's beautiful, it's an antique. It is to be. It was in an ancient house. If you've stolen this painting, do you think that makes me more likely to purchase it? The first voice asked. I found myself drawn to the exchange, so I led the others toward the back of the flea market, where a woman had an entire rack of paintings and other paintings stacked up on easels and desks. A grubby-looking man was holding a medium-sized painting and talking to a woman wearing a large hat, just NPCs reading off a script. As we approached, The man turned to look at us, and I saw the ancient painting in his hands. It was of a beautiful, regal woman, a close-up portrait. While I'm sure that she was quite a dame, what drew my attention was her necklace. It was a silver vial on a silver chain. I wasn't sure what it might contain, but it looked like some liquid, like mercury in a thermometer. It was entrancing, and it was an omen. We had found it. Straight on. Its danger level was, honey, I'm scared. The omen was triggered by bringing the painting to the historic Southeast Carousel and placing it in the back of a wood panel station wagon parked on Green Street. That's it, I said. I grabbed the folded-up missing posters from my pocket for Logan and Avery. Sure enough, they showed up on the red wallpaper next to the omen and its information. We had figured it out. Holy hell, we found it, Ant-Man said, and as he stared at it, like me, he was entranced by the necklace. In fact, as I looked around, everyone was. You like it? The man said. He had no name on the red wallpaper other than Miscreant. Now it was Kimberly's turn. She had good moxie and actual people skills to go along with it. We're just here to browse, she said. That is a nice painting. You're right, it is, the Miscreant said. Tell you what, $70, and it's yours. Kimberly shrugged. Like I said, we're just looking. Oh, come on. I saw the way you looked at it, the Miscreant said. Tell you what, take it off my hands, and we can do 65. Kimberly said, no, thank you, and turned to the NPC who was selling all the other paintings. I'm looking for something pastoral, almost. You know, a painting of nature, she said. I think I have a couple that you might be interested in. Just give me one moment, the woman said. Look, the Miscreant said, trying to get Kimberly's attention. This is the painting you want, I can tell. You almost look like the lady in the picture. In fact, I had not even spotted that, but Kimberly did kind of look like the woman in the picture. But the painting was an oil painting, and it wasn't exactly fine on the details of anything but the necklace. It could have been any blonde woman, but after he said it looked like Kimberly, I couldn't help but notice it. Then I guess all I really need is a mirror, then, huh? Kimberly said. Don't be like that, the Miscreant said. I'll tell you what, just give me what you got on you. Come on, look at it, it's a beautiful painting, one of a kind. Only then did Kimberly glance at the painting and look it over. 30, she said, and that's just because I like the frame. We're not going all the way down to 30. What were we at, 65? I thought you said 60, Kimberly said. I said 65, the Miscreant said. And I said 30, Kimberly said. 60, the man said. Kimberly shook her head. 30. 55. 30. No, you have to go up. That's how this works, the man said. 35, Kimberly said. I'm staying at 55, the man said. Kimberly turned back to the woman selling all the other paintings and said, do you have any frames like that one? Then she pointed at the frame with the painting of the omen. I'm sure I could find something similar, the woman said. Oh, bull, the Miscreant said. 50, then. I only have $40, Kimberly said. The man growled in frustration and looked up at the air. Oh, all right. But know that you are really hurting my bottom line for no reason. You don't know what I risked to get this thing. The man reluctantly handed over the painting, and Kimberly handed over a stack of coins in large denominations. Nice doing business with you, she said. Nice doing business with you. Ripping out my guts, the man growled as he walked away. And just like that, we had finally accomplished what we had set out to do, what we had walked all over Carousel for. We had the omen for straight on. It was time for the planning to really begin. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.